Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the GBYWN Australia podcast. I'm your host, as usual, Aston Crude, 11-time heavyweight champion. Here today, this is the hottest podcast I've ever done. The temperature's very clammy out here. It's very humid. I feel like I'm on holiday. And what better way to spend a holiday? Just getting away from the hustle and bustle of day-to-day life. What better way to go on vacation than with the biggest star I've ever had on this podcast, my man, the former booker and general manager of the Inner City Wrestling Syndicate, a very good friend of mine, ladies and gentlemen, Chris Zeplin.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, and I just want to say that any reports of my death are greatly exaggerated.
Very well said. Yes, he's alive, he's kicking, and, things seem to be going very well for you. You got a full-time job now, you finished your studies nearly 2 years ago, you said?
Yep, nearly 2 years ago now, so time flies, I guess, when you're having fun.
Yep, and time certainly did fly by during your time in backyard wrestling.
Mm-hmm.
As we were speaking on the car ride over, it felt like just the other day that we had the XCW versus ICWS
That's right.
series, and that was half a decade ago.
Yeah, it was 5 years ago.
Yep, so
Wow.
crazy stuff. But, as usual, when I start off the podcast, I like to get a little bit of a background on how people got into wrestling in general. So
Yep.
how did you get into wrestling?
That's a long time ago. Would have been around 2005, 2006. So basically, Dan, my brother, and I had a cousin who would give us tapes of episodes of Raw and SmackDown. So we would just watch those. I didn't really get into wrestling that much to start with. Like, it was more just something to watch with Dan. Didn't really sort of maybe get into it as much as some of the other guys might have done. But basically just watching that. I think one of the first things I remember was, this was around the time when DX had come back. So when they'd been away for a few years, and then they came back and did that feud with the Spirit Squad and the McMahons and all that.
Okay.
And one of the first things I remember watching was when they did that segment with Shawn Michaels and the Spirit Squad, and basically the Spirit Squad were just kicking the shit out of him. Yeah. And they wrapped a chair around Shawn Michaels' leg. Yeah. And I think it was Kenny or whichever one it was, went to do the leg drop, trying to break his leg. Yeah. And I actually thought at the time, because obviously I didn't know wrestling was fake yet, I actually thought they were really going to break his leg.
Oh, okay.
So,
you actually thought that there was this group of male cheerleaders.
I don't know. It was pretty cool at the time. Yeah. So that's, I guess, how I got started with wrestling. I think Dan was always into it more than I was to start with. But as I got into the backyard side of things, with meeting guys like DJ and Eli through school, that's sort of, I guess, where my passion for wrestling started.
Okay. So were you already friends with Daniel and MC Cruel and Nick James when you got into wrestling? Or did you become friends with them afterwards?
Some of them I was. So Knuckles and Eli, I think I was already friends with. Okay. And then DJ I sort of met through them. Yeah. Nick, who's obviously DJ's brother, I didn't meet until I think we started the first GWF show, as it was in those days. Okay. Yeah. So I guess really it was just a case of mutual friends sort of getting together, deciding to do this backyard wrestling thing. Yep. And that's how it all started, really. Okay.
So that's the formation of the Ultimate Wrestling Federation in 2007, I believe.
That's right, yep.
So you have your first event, Twisted Metal 1, March 2007.
Mm-hmm. It's a long time ago now.
Yeah, that is 8 years ago.
8 years ago,
yeah. Yep. Long time, man.
It is.
So, that's where it all began for all you guys. Yep. And who, when you guys were organising the UWF,
yep,
who was in charge? Was it a group decision?
Well, I know to start out with, it was mostly DJ and Eli, and I think Nick sort of running the show. I wasn't really involved in booking or anything like that at this point. I was more just tagging along because it was something to do with friends.
Yeah.
So really it was mostly them. They came up with most of the matches and the storylines and all that sort of stuff. And it wasn't until, I think, about a year after we started that I really started getting involved in all the booking. There was another one, Chad, I don't know if you remember him. Chadyo, yep. So he was getting involved a bit as well. And I think the point where I actually started booking was we had a show called Damage Control in, I think it was August 2008. And this was going to be Chad's last show because he was going back to the USA.
Yeah.
And there was a bit of argument about, what we should do for Chad's last show. And because Chad, I think Chad was the hardcore champion at the time. And we wanted him to drop the title. But, there was some arguments about what we should do with that and like all the things that Chad wanted to do before he left. And so basically, I think it was Eli and DJ and Chad were all sort of arguing with each other. And I just decided, you know what, I'll just come up with something and, see what they think. And I basically wrote out a script for the whole show, like every match and all the promos in between.
Yeah.
And I sort of did it like, I didn't expect the guys to really run with it, but I showed it to them and they were like, yeah, this is really cool, I think we should do this. And that's really how the booking side of things started for me. So
it was quite a long part into the future, from March 2007 to, what was it, August 2008?
That's right, but when we started, we didn't do shows every month like we ended up doing.
Yeah.
So we had the first Twisted Metal, which was March 2007, and then Twisted Metal 2, which was the next show, I think was about 6 months later.
Yeah, September.
That's right, and then I think it was 6 months again until Uprising, which was the next show. So we sort of had a long wait between shows when we first started out, and it wasn't until that 2008 time that we really started doing shows on a regular basis.
Yep. I remember in DJ's podcast he mentioned about I can't remember the guy's name. The guy was making the DVD for the first event.
Oh, that was his Uncle Alan.
Uncle Alan.
Yeah,
right.
so his uncle. This was for the first show. Basically, obviously we decided that we wanted to do this wrestling thing.
Yeah.
And his uncle basically said that he could help us out. He worked in media. I think he did like a radio show in Japan, and he'd worked in TV and that sort of stuff. So basically he was a pro. He knew what he was doing. He was able to film it for us and make a DVD out of it, which was really cool. So we filmed the show, and then we went back about a month later to DJ's house and watched the DVD, and we thought, wow, this is really awesome. Like,
excellent.
Just these guys, a bunch of friends, and then watching this DVD, and it's like this really cool thing. I mean, obviously, at that point we were wrestling on bare grass, so that and we were 13, 14 years old, so the quality of the wrestling wasn't great. But but yeah, just the whole there's a mosquito just buzzing around. Just the whole, I guess, the presentation of it, and that really set the scene, I guess, for what the UWF and later the ICWS would become. Just like doing DVDs and recaps, and the whole media side of it, I think, was probably started by DJ's Uncle Alan.
Cool. I thought I'd just mention it because DJ made it seem like he was a really big part of the early days for you guys.
He only really did the first show, but I guess in a way it was, without his help we probably wouldn't have been able to get started in the way we did. So I guess his involvement was quite a big thing at the time.
Yep. So Knuckles is the first ever UWF champion.
Yep.
I'm under the impression Knuckles maybe is decided as the champion because he would actually maybe beat everyone in a real fight.
Possibly. I think it was more that we, because obviously DJ and Eli were mostly running the show at that point, and I think it was more they probably couldn't decide amongst themselves who would be the first champion, so they just picked Knuckles instead.
Okay.
But yeah, I think it's quite funny because people obviously talk about Knuckles being this big, intimidating guy, but when I first met him, he was actually kind of like small and a bit of a nerd. So it's
not the pneumonia that we know.
That's right. Like, he used to wear glasses and sort of he'll probably hate me for saying this, but he was a bit of a puny kid, really.
Really, a bit of a pencil neck geek.
Yeah,
when we
first started high school.
Yeah, what? I think he's still a nerd.
He might be. He's a nerd, but he'll still beat the crap out of you.
Yeah, no, that's true.
But So yeah, he was the first champion. So he won the Twisted Metal tournament.
That's right, yeah.
Which I actually did have a bit of involvement in that, because basically the concept of the show was it was the final stages of this tournament to crown the first UWF champion.
Yeah.
And my involvement was to work out the point system for the tournament, so that
I remember reading that up.
That's right.
I wanted to ask you about the point system.
Yeah. So basically, we knew what all the matches were going to be beforehand, and we knew that Knuckles was going to beat Nick James in the final and win the title and all that. So DJ's Uncle Alan asked me to work out how the whole points thing would work, because I was good at maths, or at least better than anyone else.
Yeah.
So I worked it all out, and then it was all fine. It worked out perfectly. And then apparently, I don't know if this is true or not, but apparently when Uncle Alan was making the DVD, he found that there was something wrong with the way I'd done the points. Like someone, I don't know if Nick James was supposed to finish second, but the way the points worked out, he came third or something like that. So basically, he redid the point system, and it was all fine, except there was one match in the tournament where I think it was Knuckles versus Nick James or something. Yeah. In the first part of the tournament. Yeah. And then after the match, when you look on the DVD, you see that Eli's actually got points from that match, even though he didn't wrestle in it.
Okay.
So, I thought I'd worked out the points perfectly, and then I don't know who it was, but someone changed it around and basically stuffed it up. So.
Okay.
So that was
shit happens in backyard wrestling.
Yeah.
This is backyard wrestling. We're allowed to make mistakes.
Yeah, and obviously we were pretty new at the time. So.
Yeah. Okay, so Twisted Metal 2 in September 2007. Why are we doing a second Twisted Metal in the same year?
Well, I think the original concept for Twisted Metal was that it was more of a episode format. So I think when we filmed at the time, we actually intended it to be 2 episodes, because I think everyone had 2 matches at that show.
Okay. Gotcha. Okay.
So that was sort of the original concept, and then as we started doing different event names, Twisted Metal just became the big show of the year.
The flagship event.
Simply because it was the first show.
Excellent. It's kind of like what XCW was with Christmas Chaos. Yeah. It was like our flagship show, just because it was the first event.
Yeah.
Even though I try to make Extreme Evolution our big show, but really it was always Christmas Chaos, which was the one which had all the hype. So Blood Bandit wins the title.
Yep.
Knuckles doesn't show up to this event, so you crown a new champion.
That's right. So
but he loses it in the same show to MC Cruel. Is that because it's the episodic series, and then the next episode he's going to lose?
Yeah, I think it was something like that. And because originally I think Knuckles was going to defend the title against Blood Bandit, but then for whatever reason Knuckles couldn't show up. So we made up this backstory about how he had a knee injury in training and was forced to give up the championship, which actually it turned out really well, because we ended up coming back to that storyline at some future shows.
Yeah.
So that was pretty cool. Excuse me. So basically Blood Bandit won and lost the title on the same day.
Okay. What was the reasoning behind Blood Bandit being given the belt? Because it's his first event.
Yeah, we he was a guy we knew from school, so he was this big tall guy he was kind of like the Knuckles, I guess, of that period where no one really wanted to wrestle him. And actually there's a funny story with Blood Bandit where because Knuckles wasn't there, we came up with Blood Bandit versus Chadyo for the vacant championship.
Yeah.
And in that match, basically, Blood Bandit picked Chadyo up and dropped him face first straight onto the grass, because we were still wrestling on grass at that point. And Chadyo sort of ran off and thought he'd broken his nose or had a concussion or whatever. And when we went to watch the footage back, you could see Blood Bandit picking Chadyo up, and then the film cut out straight to the next match. So we never got to watch it back. We think that maybe Chad might have got the camera and sort of rolled back the tape so it would tape over him being face planted.
Oh, cheeky bastard.
Yeah, but unfortunately we never got to watch that back, and because obviously Chad didn't want to wrestle Blood Bandit again, we never really filmed a proper ending to that match, so I think we just said that Bandit won by knockout and became the new champion.
Okay, gotcha. And that's why it's always said it was won by knockout.
That's right, yep.
Gotcha.
And then he lost it to MC Cruel on the same day.
Okay, so I believe Bloodband only does a couple of shows.
Yep.
Why was it only a couple of shows, and why did he depart?
I'm not sure. I think he was kind of like Knuckles, I guess, in that he wasn't really that interested in wrestling, and he was just doing it as a way to hang out with friends. I'm still pretty good friends with him. I actually just saw him the other day, so I still see him sort of semi-regularly.
Do you ever call him Blood Bandit?
No. No. If you asked him about it, he probably wouldn't remember it, to be honest, or he might not want to talk about it. But no, he was sort of, I guess, one of those early guys who was sort of around when we were first really getting into this stuff. So.
And then just disappeared.
Yeah.
It happened with XCW too.
Yeah.
You know, and I'll keep on reverting back to this. And I don't care if anyone out there doesn't care about what I have to say about XCW, but it happened a lot back in the early days of XCW. Guys would come and they were there for just a short stint, and then you never saw them again.
Yeah.
But that happens in backyard wrestling.
Yeah.
Next question, MC Cruel's the champ, obviously. What was he like in the early days of UWF?
In the early days, I think he was just one of the guys like anyone else. He was obviously probably the most gifted wrestler we had in the UWF era. He was probably the one guy who really took it seriously and was really coordinated in the way he did moves and that sort of stuff.
Yep.
So I guess he was a trendsetter in that respect. From a personality point of view, he was pretty good to start with. Obviously later on we had a bit of trouble with him, but I'm sure we'll get to that later on.
Of course.
Yep. But yeah, like to begin with, like all the guys, we were really just doing it for fun. There weren't really any egos at this point because we were all 14, 15 years old, just sort of mucking around in the yard doing this backyard wrestling thing. And it wasn't until I think we started the whole ICWS era that we started to take it more seriously and really make it into a more polished product, if that's the way to describe it.
I would. I'll describe it like that too. Sadistic debuts at Twisted Metal 2.
Yep.
Doesn't stick around too long. I didn't look over every event result, so I don't know how long his stint was. So maybe he was there for 3 months, maybe he was there a year.
He was around the same amount of time as Blood Bandit, I think.
Okay, so well, he doesn't stick around too long. I believe he breaks his wrist.
He was. That's right. He was supposed to be in a hardcore title match with Chad, and I don't know what happened, but basically he broke his wrist quite badly, and that basically stopped him from wrestling for however long he was injured, and then he decided he didn't want to come back. So I think DJ had some ideas for bringing him back, where he wanted him to wear the cast around his wrist and use it to clothesline people. I remember that being one of DJ's early ideas.
Okay.
But for whatever reason, he just never came back until much, much later.
Yeah, does it? And that's the next question. Does it blow your mind that in 2015, Sadistic returns? Yeah,
it's pretty crazy, isn't it? After 6 or 7 years away from backyard wrestling, and then suddenly he just comes back and he's doing more or less the same thing really as what he was doing when he left. Just that sort of oddball, crazy guy sort of character. Yeah,
but he's wrestling really good. I've been really impressed with how quickly he picked it up. Yeah, considering that it probably barely even counts what he did back then, because he probably doesn't even remember really doing it that much. Right. It's so long ago. Yeah. Now he's better than I think a lot of people would have expected of a big guy, might not be as coordinated, but no, he's actually been going out there. When he lays in a clothesline, he lays in a clothesline. When he hits a move, he hits a move. It's really no pussyfooting around. He's been doing really well.
Yeah, I haven't seen much of him in his comeback, but that's really good.
Yeah, and I'm hoping to maybe bring him over to WCWA at some point.
Okay, that'd be cool.
Even if it's just for a little while. Yep. Just be cool to have him in the alumni.
Yeah.
So I'm always big on the alumni. Have as many people from the past pop in for a cup of coffee as possible. Yeah. So at Uprising, I believe this is the third show.
Yep, that's right.
There's a hardcore division that begins.
Yep.
Why a hardcore division, and why is Nick James chosen as the first champion?
So I think. I guess the hardcore division at the time was just an opportunity to bring in a second title. So when we started out, we just had the heavyweight championship, and we wanted another title. We We didn't really have enough guys at the time to really justify having 2 titles, I think, but it was just something that...
just to make things a bit more fun.
Probably, yeah, just something for DJ and Eli wanted to do, so we brought that in. So Nick was the first champion, but he only held the title for about 5 minutes because...
Oh, Chad Yo won it in 24/7
That's
rules,
right. That's right. So when we first brought in the hardcore title, we had a 24/7 rule, so basically the same as the WWF version, where the title was defended at all times. So Nick beat Chad in the first title match, and then after the match there was an interview. I think I was doing an interview with Nick, and then Chad came in and attacked him and pinned him and won the title. And I think that was the only time the hardcore title ever changed hands under the 24/7 rule, so I think we just got rid of it after that.
Okay. So your main duties at the moment are cameraman?
Yep.
And doing interviews?
Yep.
Behind the camera?
Yep, and I was also doing refereeing at that point.
Oh, okay, cool. Okay, excellent. So I know Chad Yo sticks around for a bit longer.
Yep.
But I wanted to bring it up now.
Yep.
Your memories of Chad Yo and his influence on the UWF, because Dan Zeplin and his podcast, he really talked up Chad Yo's influence. And
well, Dan and Chad were really close friends at that time, I think.
The VCA?
So they did a tag team called the VCA, which was basically Dan and Chad just going around being dickheads, really, as you do.
Yeah.
But yeah, Chad and Dan were really good friends, which is kind of ironic because Chad's the same age as me, and Dan's obviously 2 years younger, and yet he was probably closer to Dan than he was to me.
Yeah.
But Chad was a really big part of the early UWF. He was very outspoken. Sometimes people didn't always agree with what he said, but that was just the way he was.
Well, he's an American.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. And he liked to tell you about that as well. But he was a really big part. He was always involved in coming up with storylines. He was the hardcore champion for a while and sort of really, I guess, established that title as the secondary title of the ICWS, of the UWF, sorry. So, and it was a shame to see him go. It would have been great to see him stick around and wrestle more guys. I don't think he ever wrestled DJ or Knuckles, he might have wrestled Knuckles, I think. But obviously with more guys coming in the future, it would have been awesome to see Chad wrestle some of those guys, but it wasn't to be.
Yep. Where do you think Chad Yo could have gone if he stuck around? Do you think he would have been certainly someone that could be main event heavyweight title?
Oh, I think so for sure. Yeah, he was very good at promos, or at least in those days, he was good at promos. He was reasonably good with his technical wrestling ability as well, I think. Maybe not quite on the same level as, say, Eli, but certainly one of the better guys, I think.
Yep.
I guess he probably would have gone down the same path that maybe DJ or Knuckles did, where obviously they both hung around for a long time and they sort of played the veteran role, and I guess Chad would have done something similar.
Yep.
But I guess that's just one of the big unknowns in the history of the UWF and ICWS.
Yep.
Who knows?
Yeah. So Uprising, Dan Zeplin, your brother, joins the fray.
Yep.
Against Sadistic.
Yep. That was a good match.
No good.
Yeah.
So why is Dan not involved in 2007? Why does he come in at Uprising?
I think that was because Dan didn't start high school until 2008, so he didn't really know like DJ and Eli and Nick.
So when he joined high school, he hung out with you
pretty
guys?
much, yeah. He sort of, because I think I told the guys that, I've got this brother Dan who's sort of interested in wrestling, maybe we should bring him along. And DJ said, oh yeah, that's cool, I think the Uprising, let's just slot him against Sadistic, because Sadistic's got nothing else to do.
Yeah.
And that's how it started, really.
Okay.
It's funny though, because people always think of Dan as being one of the UWF or ICWS originals, but technically he's not.
Yeah.
No, technically it's DJ, Nick, Eli, Knuckles, and I guess you can count me as well. I don't think I'm usually included as an original, but I was there at the first show, so.
Yep. So one thing I wanted to bring up is your relationship with your brother Dan.
Yep.
Because I always get on him about this. I always say, why don't you and Chris just go to the fucking pub and have a couple of beers, it seems like you guys are two totally different people. You don't really, hang out a lot, or you don't have too much to do with one another. But has that relationship slowly been distancing because you're two different people and you don't, he's doing his thing, you're doing your thing. You see each other at the dinner table, but
not even that, he's hardly home anymore.
Yeah.
I think it's just we're different personalities and we just have different social circles. I get along with Dan perfectly fine, but we just, I guess, don't really have much to do with each other. He does his own thing, I do my own thing, and I think really it was probably backyard wrestling that really sort of brought us together, I guess, and gave us something that we were both involved in together.
Yeah.
But I guess outside of wrestling, we don't really have a lot to do with each other, which I don't think is necessarily a bad thing. That's just the way it is, really.
Yeah.
Just two different people.
Yeah.
Doing different things.
Well, I'm just putting it out there. You guys should go to the pub for a couple of beers.
Yeah, maybe we will at some time.
I don't know if there's a 21st birthday coming up.
It'll be Jan's 21st next year.
Yeah,
so.
next year. Yeah. Okay, I thought it was this year.
No, next year.
Okay.
Maybe we'll do something for that.
Yeah. So one forgotten ICWS alumni I wanted to bring up was referee David Thomas.
Ah, Davey Thomas.
Yeah.
Wow.
I read his name in the results. Was like, oh man, I remember him.
Yeah. So I actually still see him occasionally as well. But he was just another guy from school who sort of hung out with us. He was kind of the same as me in that he didn't really want to be involved in the wrestling side of things. So we just got him to do refereeing. And he was probably the craziest, strangest referee you'll ever see, because the first show he did, he didn't even know what wrestling was or what the rules were or anything like that. So I think there was one time where I think there was a match between Blood Bandit and Dan Zeplin, and Blood Bandit put Dan into a hammerlock and then made Dan tap out. So Dan was just sort of lying there on the floor, and then Dave comes in and starts counting a pin. So I don't think he really knew what he was doing to start with, but he sort of came and went a couple of times. I think he was involved in a few of the early UWF shows, and then I think he came back for one or two ICWS shows as well.
Yeah, I think I met him in the later shows.
Yeah, I think there was one random show where he just came back and refereed a couple of matches. So,
yeah.
But yeah, he's another guy who's sort of, I guess, as you say, part of the alumni of UWF and ICWS.
Yeah. So he's doing all right these days?
Yeah, he's same as me, working full time. He dropped out of high school early and got into a pretty good job. He works in IT, same as me. So he's going pretty well, I think.
Okay.
From what I hear.
Cool. So I don't know if I'm getting the timeline wrong here, but at some point you guys do move location to the Z Arena.
Yep. So that was. So the Z Arena. So that would have been mid-2008. So basically the first few shows we did at DJ's house, which was the Rose Garden. And then I think the way that started was we were going to do a show at his place, and then for whatever reason we couldn't. So we ended up doing it at my place instead.
Yep.
Obviously we had to convince Mum and Dad to let us host the show, which, as usual, Dad was like, yeah, sure, that's fine. And Mum was
like, no.
Yeah, pretty much. But we managed to convince her in the end, and started having shows at our place. So I think the arrangement for the rest of 2008 was to alternate between our house and DJ's house.
Okay.
And then eventually, when we changed to ICWS and built a more permanent base, we moved that out to Stoneville.
Okay. So there was still a little bit more back and forth.
That's
here
right.
And there.
That's
okay.
right. Yeah.
Well, that's interesting because XCW had one place for ages until we weren't allowed to do it there anymore, and then we would go to this. Do you have a trampoline? Oh, do you have a big backyard? Okay. Yeah. We'll go there for a while until the parent says no more. Yeah. So eventually we finally got one place where we were allowed to do it all the time. But man, we kept on getting banned, and the infamous dented shed.
Yeah, I've seen the documentary.
Yeah, it's devastating. All right, so I did have a question into 2008. How were you coming along as booker? But you really kind of took over that later on, didn't you?
Yeah, so that was around from about August onwards. I think that was when I started to get more involved. It was still I think mostly me and DJ, and I think Eli was still involved as well. So it wasn't until a bit later where I think myself and Dan sort of took over it a bit more.
Okay.
But yeah, around that time it was just the 3 or 4 of us sort of
all working
getting together. We tended to get the whole group together because we all went to the same high school, or most of us did. So
I heard about you guys would go to the library.
Yeah. So we would meet up in the library and talk about shows and storylines and what we were going to do.
I'd love to be in a fly on the wall.
Yeah,
that would be very interesting.
Some of that early stuff was good fun.
Okay, sorry, I've misspelled something, so I got confused. But I wrote Big Man, but it's supposed to say Big Mac.
Big Man.
So Chad Yo leaves.
Yep.
I think it's the same show that Big Mac and Blaze debut.
Yep, so that's Damage Control.
And I believe Big Mac wrestles Chad Yo on the undercard.
That's correct.
At some stage.
Yep, that was his first match, I think.
Anyway, from what I've heard, Big Mac wasn't really like a wrestling fan, but he just did it to kind of hang out.
Yep.
But what are your thoughts and memories on Blaze and Big Mac, and what do you think they mean in the history to...
Well, Big Mac was, as you said, one of those guys who just sort of came in for the social aspect. He wasn't really into wrestling all that much. He was just a really cool guy. Like he was a really nice guy, really fun to hang out with, really funny guy. And yeah, I remember one time, I think it was at the end of 2008, we did like an end of year celebration at his house because his parents felt guilty about my parents and DJ's parents always hosting the shows, so they offered to host something. So they were a really nice family, and he was a really nice guy. And unfortunately, he sort of dropped off the scene after a while. But
fun fact: the last show he was at, managing Nick James, was my debut.
Oh yeah, that's right.
So
right.
We did cross paths just slightly.
I forgot about that actually.
Yeah. So Blaze also joins.
Yep.
So what are your memories, and what do you think he means to history?
So he was a friend of Dan's. He was a bit more into wrestling than Big Mac was. I think he used to watch it with Dan. So he came in. I think it's fair to say he wasn't the most gifted wrestler. He was a bit awkward in the ring at times, on the base I should say. But he was one of those guys who was fairly reliable, would come to every show, would always, try to put on the best match he could, so you couldn't really blame him for that. And yeah, he was one of those guys. He hung around a bit longer than Big Mac, I think. I think at one point he was going to challenge Dan for, this is jumping ahead a bit, but he won a tournament to become #1 contender for the ICWS title, and then he left right after that. So he never ended up getting that title shot.
Gotcha.
But, yeah, he was just another one of those guys who was there for that early period where, it was just guys from school doing the whole getting together once a month and just mucking around on the base, really.
Yep, cool. So Carnage Crew are formed at Blood, Sweat and Tears on September 29th, 2008.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess pretty much from the get-go they're starting a feud with you.
That's right, yep.
So when did you start becoming more of an on-screen general manager?
I think it was probably around that time, to be honest. Obviously I'd already been doing the interviewing and refereeing stuff, but it was around that time where I think I was first referred to as the acting general manager, because I think the original idea was that the GM was just some anonymous person who you never saw on screen.
Yep.
And then it ended up being me. So, but the way that feud actually started was going back to Damage Control, Chad's last show. So Nick James joined Chad and Dan in the VCA. And basically, as a goodbye present for Chad, they came up to me and sprayed me with silly string. And there's this funny video where I'm being sprayed with silly string and I sort of fall to the ground and start...
You sell it like you've been shot with a gun.
That's right. I'm sort of shaking on the ground and doing all this weird stuff.
Oh man, it's so good.
I don't know if the silly string paralysed me or something, but so I sort of completely oversold that. But
it's so good, man.
Yeah, there's a lot of early stuff from that UWF era that you sort of look back now and you think, it's so stupid, but it's really funny to watch.
I didn't realise VCA and Carnage Crew actually kind of crossed over.
Well, they were kind of the same team. After Chad left, it became
kind of
the
same
Carnage Crew.
thing.
Yeah, it was kind of the same thing. So it was sort of that transition period where both Nick and Chad were in, and then Nick sort of took Chad's spot after that.
Interesting. I didn't know that, so I've learned something new today.
There you go.
So, do you have many fond memories of working in this feud with Nick James? I know there was one particular video where he slapped you in the face.
Yes, that was. I think that was much later, actually.
Was it?
Yeah, I think that was. Wasn't that when he wanted the rematch against Dan for the title?
Oh, maybe he split by then.
Yeah, I think that was later.
Okay, my bad.
There was, at that show you mentioned, Blood, Sweat and Tears, there was another famous, or infamous, if you can call it that, incident where basically Nick and Dan sort of came up to me and said, "Oh, Chris, we've got to show you something." And then they took me into this room, which I think was actually DJ's bedroom, and then they locked the door and they took over running the show. Started booking their own matches. Yeah. So, and then it cut at the end of the show on the DVD. It cuts back to me like banging on this door, saying, "Let me out, let me out!" And it was quite funny. So, yeah. So that was sort of how the whole Carnage Crew versus Chris Zeplin feud really started.
Yeah.
And then at the next event, which was the first ever Halloween Hell, I think I put Dan in a triple because Dan and Nick held both the championship at this point. Yeah. So Nick was the heavyweight champion and Dan was the hardcore champion.
Yeah.
So I put Dan in a triple threat match against Big Mac and Blaze, and booked Nick in a 4-way match for the heavyweight championship against the other 3 originals. So DJ, Knuckles, and MC Cruel.
Yeah.
And like the idea was that I was trying to get back at them by putting them in these matches where you'd think they have no chance of winning, and then of course they both win. Yeah. And then at the very end of that show, I bring out DJ and MC Cruel, and they attack the Carnage Crew, and then it's revealed that I've hired them as my hired guns to destroy the Carnage Crew.
So is that where Easy Money?
That was the start of Easy Money. Yep. So. Yeah, that turned into a pretty big feud over the next few shows.
Okay.
Yeah, that was good fun.
Cool. So the next show I've got written in here is UWF Final Frontier.
Mm-hmm.
November 23rd, 2008.
Yep.
It's the last UWF show before renaming it to ICWS.
That's right.
Why the name change? Whose decision? And when you answer this, I'm going to get a beer.
Alrighty. So I think with the name change, the main reason was that UWF Ultimate Wrestling Federation was just such a generic name that we wanted to replace with something a bit more that would stand out a bit more. So we went from UWF to Inner City Wrestling Syndicate, which I think is just a generic name, but at least it's a bit more catchy. So it stands out a bit more. But I think we wanted to rebrand it a bit with having the more permanent base as well. So
I think someone said that the 4-initialed Backyard Wrestling Group name was quite prominent over East.
Yeah, it might have been. I guess. Yeah.
I don't know if Dan or DJ said that, but that was like the in thing. Or something.
Yeah, that's probably fair enough. But yeah, I think the main reason was just that Ultimate Wrestling Federation is just such a bland, generic name that we wanted something that stood out a bit more.
Hey man, I had Extreme Championship Wrestling for 10 years. I know all about generic names.
Fair enough.
Did you ever pay attention to what happened in the Eastern States and think, man, I wish we could be like
probably not at first. I never really got into the whole talking to the East Coast guys quite as much as maybe Dan or Eli did. It was more just watching out of interest, seeing what other guys were doing. I guess the main difference with those guys was they were a bit older than us, so they were a bit more advanced, and obviously feds like OAH had rings and or permanent bases and that sort of stuff, and we were really just starting out. But
Taboo told me that they all practiced all the time, all the time. Yeah. So no wonder they got so good.
Yeah.
Like anyone would get that good if they were practicing constantly. So
yeah, I think a few of the guys in ICWS did that. I remember Relay and Dan would often practice when we had the base at our place. They would often practice matches in our backyard, but some of the other guys maybe not so much. So yeah, I guess it depended on how dedicated some of the guys were and all that sort of stuff.
So Final Frontier, I think I've got it written down in the right spot. Johnny Rocket debuts.
Yep.
Thoughts and memories on Johnny Rocket. He's infamous because of the big red afro. Everyone sees him in the alumni section on the website. I was wondering, who the hell is Johnny Rocket? Where did he go?
So Johnny Rocket was a family friend of the Johnstons, so DJ and Nick. I think DJ had wanted to bring him in for a while, but for whatever reason, he didn't come in until Final Frontier.
Okay.
But basically, he came in. I think his first match was against Nick, because Nick seemed like the best choice for him to wrestle at that point.
Yeah.
I think there was a storyline around that actually, where Johnny Rocket was supposed to be Nick was supposed to be Johnny Rocket's mentor, and then when Nick formed the Carnage Crew with Dan, he sort of got rid of Johnny Rocket and had Dan instead.
Okay.
So I think we were going to sort of make a feud out of that between Dan and Johnny Rocket, but we never really got around to that.
Yeah.
But yeah, he was, I guess, in the same
category as Blaze and Big Mac?
I think so, yeah. Just one of those guys who was there in the early days. He was, I guess, our high flyer at the time. He sort of ran around a lot and was doing a lot of high-flying type moves.
Yep.
He had some pretty good matches with Nick, I remember, with Dan as well, I think. So, yeah, he was another one of those guys who I'm sure people like Ryan Tate have memorised like the back of their hand.
Oh, of course, yeah.
And others are like, who the hell's this guy? But,
yeah. Alright, so ICWS Reload, March 22nd, 2009.
Yep.
We're doing good for time, I think, so far. We're only 40 minutes in, so not doing too bad. I thought at this point we'd be, struggling, but we're doing good.
Cool.
So MC Cruel wins the ICWS title back off Nick James?
No, it's sort of funny what happened here, because we did a match...
I can't remember who was the champion at this time.
So the title was actually vacant at that time, so we did a match between Nick and Eli at Final Frontier.
Oh.
And Nick won the match sort of by cheating. I can't remember exactly what he did, like he rolled him up, pulling the tights or whatever. And then I come out and said, "Oh, we don't want this, we're going to restart the match." And Nick said, "Okay, but the title's not on the line." So then Eli beats him, and then I think the title got vacated after that.
Okay.
And then I came out at Reload and said that Eli would wrestle Big Mac for the title. And because at this point I was still feuding with Nick, so basically I wanted to keep Nick away from the title scene.
Plus it was like the new ICWS champion.
That's right, yeah. So it was to crown the first champion under the ICWS banner. So so Eli beat Big Mac and won the title, and then at the following show we did a tag match between...
Let's not get too far ahead of ourselves.
Okay, all right, yep.
We're almost there,
cool.
though. I've got it written down, and I'm excited to talk about that. Reload.
Yep.
Overkill debuts against the Playgroup. I think that's their first outing.
Yep.
So, we got two vastly different stories going on here. Why didn't Overkill last long? And your memories of the fun times with the Playgroup. Let's start with Overkill.
So Overkill was...
I told you we're going to mention every single person.
You're right, you're not kidding. So Overkill was another family friend of the Johnstons, same as Johnny Rocket. He didn't last very long, I think, because, again, he wasn't really into wrestling that much, and to be honest, he wasn't that good at it. I remember it was really hard to get a good match out of him, so I guess after a while we kind of didn't really put too much effort into him.
Yeah.
That sounds terrible to say, but he was just one of those guys who sort of came and went pretty quickly. And then the Playgroup, so I can't remember exactly where that came about or how the Playgroup started, but basically it was Dan, DJ, and Eli just putting on these masks and playing these ridiculous characters.
Pirate Pete,
Obi was DJ, and Sam was Eli's character. Yep. And basically they would just come out and goof around,
big
like
goofballs.
Yeah, just act like little kids. And I did a bit of a rivalry with them where there was one show where they did a match and then they lost, and I said, "Oh, your performances are just so bad, I'm going to have to fire you." And they were like, No, don't fire us. And then I ended up firing them, and then I think they came back later and did another thing, and then I fired them again, and then eventually they came back for one more show, and then that was it really. But I think there's a video on YouTube, the
Playgroup story.
The Playgroup story, or whatever it's called.
It's very entertaining. Even if you're not a wrestling fan, you'll find it very entertaining.
Yeah, it was just one of those stupid things that I guess we did when in the early days of the ICWS. And I guess the reason that came about was because we didn't have that many guys in the Fed at the time. So having the some of the guys doing mask characters was an opportunity to have more matches and do more storylines and that sort of stuff. So
yeah, I think I got it written down later on about were the mask characters necessary to fill out the shows a bit more, which is why you had Blade Warsaw and
those sort of guys.
Okay, so let's get to Aftermath.
Yep.
April 27th, 2009.
Yep.
Easy Money versus Carnage Crew.
Yep.
I believe one of the most important matches in the history of ICWS.
Probably in the early period of the ICWS, that was a pretty big deal. So that was basically the culmination of the whole Carnage Crew versus Easy Money rivalry.
Mm-hmm.
So we did this tag match where Eli was the heavyweight champion and Dan was the hardcore champion. So we did a tag match where both belts would be on the line, and the winning team would get both titles. So basically, going into the match, you knew that at least one of the titles would change hands.
Yeah.
And it ended up being that the Carnage Crew beats Easy Money, so Nick becomes the champion again, and Dan keeps the hardcore title. So and then I think that was also the same match where Easy Money turned on each other, and that started their rivalry, which went on for I think the rest of that year. So
I just always see these things and they remind me of things in XCW.
Yeah.
Like this match is similar to a match we had in 2002 for both the hardcore and heavyweight title.
Oh, okay, there you go.
So it's like two different minds thinking the same thing at different parts of WA and have no idea that either exists.
Yeah, it's quite funny how long we went without knowing that you guys existed and you guys not knowing about us. So.
I can't believe that we never knew. So the next show, I believe, Shock Treatment. Or maybe not, maybe skipped a show or something.
No, that sounds right, yep.
Dante Daniels debuts.
Yep.
So now I want to get into the nitty-gritty of the frustrating history of Dante Daniels.
Yep.
Was it frustrating trying to keep him organised to be at shows to keep his character going?
Well, he did this one match at Shock Treatment against Nick, which was a really good match. I think Dante's brother he trained for AAW or something, so Dante sort of knew a lot about wrestling already. And because it was funny, we went to high school together, but we weren't actually friends with him for a long time. It wasn't until we sort of found out about us doing ICWS, and he was like, "Oh, this is really cool." Yeah. So he came in and did this one match at Shock Treatment, and then he went away for a long, long time. I don't think he came back for over 2 years. It might have been, it was real frustrating because he was really talented and he was miles better than anyone else at that point.
So immediately we were like, this is someone we could build for the future.
Yeah, because he actually beat Nick in that match, and Nick was the champion at the time. So for a guy in his first match to come in and beat the champion, you would know all about that.
I know all about that.
So he was a pretty big deal. But unfortunately, it didn't really work out with him for whatever reason. He just could never make it to shows. So he came and went a couple of times and did a couple of pretty good matches. He did one against Knuckles later on and one against yourself.
Wrestled Tim as well.
Yep, that's right.
And he was undefeated, and then he wrestled me, and then he was no longer undefeated.
That's right. Yeah. So he was, I guess, one of those guys where you think, oh, what could have been if he'd sort of hung around a bit more. But he made a pretty good contribution at the time to ICWS. So
yep. So how are you guys constantly finding new guys? Is it just through friends at school? Is it because you've mentioned several times DJ brought this guy and DJ brought this guy in?
Yeah, I think it was mostly that to start with. It was like DJ or Dan bringing in guys from school who sort of knew about it and wanted to join. It wasn't until much later when Dan started bringing in guys that he met through EPW or Schwa or over the internet. So guys like Mike and Justin and Clint and those sort of guys. So in the early days, you would say DJ had more of a hands-on with bringing in new guys. Then later on, it was more so Dan Zeplin. I think so, and I think that's because it was, I guess, DJ's fed to start with. If you ever asked him, he'll tell you that ICWS is his fed. Yeah. So he was really big on sort of, I guess, bringing people in and wanting to make it as good as he could make it. Okay. That was sort of the main drive for bringing people in. Yep. Around this time, obviously, we mentioned Nick James becomes the guy again as the champion. Yep. Your thoughts on Nick James as ICWS champion? Sorry, I was just finishing my chip. That's all right. So Nick had a really good run or two really good runs as ICWS champion. And I guess in a lot of ways, he was the guy who really carried the ICWS when we in those first few years. Like he was, I guess, probably the first guy who was really the face of the ICWS, like what Dan and Clint and Mike would later become. So he was the guy who would sort of wrestle anyone, and sort of have these good title matches, and make the title seem like a really important thing. So he did a really good job in that role, I think. Around that time. Obviously later on he would lose interest and sort of drop off the scene a bit, but in the early days he was probably one of the most important, probably one of the most dedicated people to ICWS as well. Like he really got into it and really did everything he could to make it good.
Yep, and that's why he's in the Australian Backyard Wrestling Hall of Fame.
That's right. And
so how did you feel when you heard that he was in the Hall of Fame?
That's awesome. I mean, it's really cool that someone like Nick, who, some of the newer guys probably think of Nick James and don't understand what all the fuss is about. But like I said, he was a really big part of the early ICWS and really paved the way for a lot of the guys that came in later to make ICWS into what it would later become.
Well, this is one of the arguments I have with the guys over East all the time about the Hall of Fame.
Yep.
It's like, why is this guy in? I've never heard of him. He wasn't that good. Compare him to us, he's not that good. And it's like, that doesn't mean anything, dude. Like, anyone can be a great wrestler. It's their influence, which is what gives them, the Hall of Fame induction. Just Mike was not a good wrestler, but he was a great heel, and he did a lot of behind the scenes stuff. He deserves it. It doesn't matter, like, okay, you have one match. You're definitely deserving of the Hall of Fame because you're influential to ICWS and all that. Doesn't mean that not anyone could be in the Hall of Fame, but people who are influential to one federation, they deserve the accolade.
And especially if that federation is quite well known as well, which I think ICWS hope is in that category. Guys like Nick and Eli and DJ, who have sort of been around for a long time and were involved in when we first started out and really helped to build it up and make it really great.
Yeah. All right. So I haven't got the show written down, which one it is. So I probably just trying to skim through certain things here at this stage.
That's right.
Bundaberg joins.
Yep.
Memories of Bundaberg and his raw talent and unfortunate departure.
So Bundaberg was probably a bit like Clint Marshall in that he came in and he was just awesome, like straight away. Yeah. Like from the very first match, we thought, wow, this guy like really knows what he's doing. And I think his first match, he was against the Playgroup, and he obviously just beat the shit out of them.
Yeah.
And then from that first match, we immediately put him into a feud with Dan Zeplin, who had just beaten Nick for the heavyweight title. Yeah. So obviously we thought that this guy was going to be a big deal. I think at one point he was going to beat Dan for the ICWS title at Twisted Metal 4, but then obviously he unfortunately went away from backyard wrestling. So
he didn't like having himself on videos.
That's right. Yeah, he was a bit hesitant to show himself on the internet. So which is fair enough. That's just the way things are sometimes.
Yeah. But from what I hear, he was great.
Yeah, he was really awesome, and he would like have the guys come over to his place, and we would watch wrestling and do wrestling in his backyard. So yeah, he was a really cool guy and really awesome to hang out with.
Yep. So Halloween Hell 2009.
Yep.
There's only 3 matches on the card.
Yeah.
So are you struggling for people?
Yeah, I think.
Or was it just a bad day?
No, I think we were struggling for people at that point. I think because by that point, guys like Johnny Rocket and Big Mac and Blaze had left. So I think Blaze was still around for a bit longer. But yeah, we were struggling to get numbers for shows, which is why we had to do things like the Playgroup and Blade Warsaw. But yeah, it was only 3 matches, but I remember that being a pretty good show. I think DJ and Eli had their big match at that show, or their first of several big matches as part of their feud, and then obviously Dan beat Nick for the ICWS title, which is
so you got 2 pretty important matches.
That's right. Yeah. Yep.
So Dan wins the ICWS title. Thoughts on him as champion? Why was Dan Zeplin chosen to take over the title from Nick?
I think we knew for a long time that Dan was going to be the next guy after Nick to be the champion. I think even when we started the whole Carnage Crew thing, we knew that it would eventually end with Nick turning on Dan and then Dan beating Nick for the title.
Yep.
So it was actually pretty cool how he sort of did a slow burn of that over several events, and then finally, I can't remember exactly what happened, but eventually Nick turns on Dan, and then Dan, I think he beat Eli in a number one contenders match, and then beat Nick for the title at Halloween Hell. So the way we did that whole storyline, I thought was pretty cool.
Yep.
And I guess that was the rise of Dan Zeplin as the face of the ICWS.
Yep. One thing I think I did forget to mention, DJ was actually UWF champion, wasn't he?
That's right. Yeah, he was.
I can't understand why I forgot to put that in there. But,
that's all right. Yep.
Thoughts of DJ as champion? I don't think he had like a hell of a long run, but
no, he only had it for a couple of shows, I think. So
was it him lobbying to be?
No, I don't think so. I think it was more like among the originals. Like obviously Knuckles was the first champion, and then Eli won it, and then DJ won it, and then Nick won it. So it was sort of going through in that order.
Yeah. Everyone getting their shot.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. So sort of all the guys, all the originals, sort of rotating through being champion.
Yeah.
But yeah, I remember DJ had a pretty good run. I think it's the only time he won a championship in the whole UWF/ICWS, which is quite interesting considering how long he's been around. And what a
he didn't help himself by continually retiring and coming back. And
well, that's true. But you'd think we would have squeezed in like a hardcore title reign or a tag team title reign in somewhere. But
I think he did want the tag titles at one stage with Knuckles, but he was also doing the pro wrestling thing. So, so around this time, we're getting towards 2010.
Yep.
Roster numbers are struggling a little bit.
Yep.
MC Cruel starts pro training.
Yep.
Do you notice a change in him when he starts pro training?
Not at first, I think. He was still pretty dedicated to backyard wrestling at that point, and he was having really good matches at that point. I think same as Bundaberg. Like they were the two guys who were really standing out. And I think at one point they actually wrestled each other as well in a main event and had a pretty good match. So I think he was just going from strength to strength and setting himself up for his eventual pro wrestling run. I think he always had ambitions of wanting to do pro wrestling, which is fair enough. I think he saw yarding as a step towards that, whereas maybe some of the others didn't have the same ambition. But yeah, I think. Even at that point, he was still one of the most important people in the ICWS, and I think in a way, him and Bundaberg and Dan were really carrying the ICWS at that point.
Yeah,
and were just putting on lots of really great matches, at least for the time.
Yep. And it's funny. Like last night, I went to EPW and had a rumble.
Yep.
And Felix Young, MC Cruel, was in the rumble. So,
oh wow, there you go. That's awesome.
So he finally made it there. Yeah. And I think he wrestled at the show they had at the Game Sports Bar last week as well.
Yep.
But after all this time now, he's actually got on an EPW card, which is really cool.
Awesome. Yeah.
Considering back in the day, you guys all used to go together to watch it.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it's funny how things.
And to think Tim Justice was the first one out of all of them.
That's
an EPW
right.
card is
that's
mental.
Right.
That's
yeah.
mental. Okay, so let's get into 2010.
Yep.
You guys find out about this crew known as SPWS.
Yep.
I guess they're friends with DJ or Dan?
So they were actually from school as well. They were actually in the year above us.
Yeah.
But so they were sort of doing their own thing. They did a couple of shows, I think, which some of the ICWS guys went to. I don't think I went to any of them, but
they had Hardcore Beginning and Crash Course.
That's right. Yep.
And the first show, I think, was a tournament to crown their first champion.
That's right.
And to think Nick James was actually in the main event of the first SPWS shows, considering the hardcore aspect, is right. Quite comical. But, so were you apprehensive at all of bringing two big guys in of their size and how they like the hardcore stuff? And
I think at first there was a bit of apprehension about bringing them in because obviously there was, I guess, concerns about whether some of the other guys would be able to work with them. Because I think at first they mostly wrestled each other. It wasn't until a bit later that we started branching out and putting them against guys like Mike and Justin and DJ. But yeah, like they came in and they really raised the bar for hardcore wrestling in ICWS. Like the stuff we did before that was sort of really, I guess, just stuff like with cardboard tubes.
Softcore.
Yeah, that's probably a good way
Sounds
to put
like
it.
XCW.
Yeah, but then these guys came in and they were using like light tubes and barbed wire and all this sort of stuff. So,
well, I mean, and once again, reverting to XCW things, we had two guys from Shane Haste's Backyard Fed.
Oh, really?
Join in 2002.
Right.
Acid Rain and James O'Mac.
Okay.
So they were from this Fed called NAW from I think in Balga.
Right.
And they came in and did a hardcore I Quit match for their first match, and we were like just stunned, like, oh my god, this is what hardcore backyard wrestling is. And like no one wanted to wrestle them. Yeah. Like I wrestled Acid Rain, I think O-Factor wrestled James O'Mac, but other than that, they just wrestled each other for a while because no one wanted to wrestle them because they were two big, scary, hardcore wrestlers.
And that's what it was like when Ice and Chaos did that famous death match at Twisted Metal 4. Like they brought out light tubes and all this other stuff, and they were just doing this crazy stuff. And I remember there's actually a funny story. I remember talking to Chaos after that match, and I was asking him, how do you do all this like light tube and hardcore stuff? And he just looked at me and said, "Adrenaline, my friend, adrenaline." And I just thought, wow, this guy is batshit crazy.
It's like he's always being filmed. Like, yes, every moment he says something has to be epic.
Yeah, that's right.
Adrenaline, my friend, adrenaline. Yeah. Brilliant. So they join the roster. Obviously, they make an impact with a couple of hardcore matches. There's supposed to be a bit of back and forth. ICWS guys go to an SPWS show for a tag match or something like that.
Yeah, I remember that being an idea.
There was going to be like an invasion kind of storyline. Were you kind of a bit hesitant to make it an invasion storyline, considering they'd only had two shows and there was only two guys from their show?
I don't think so. I think it was more just because they only did the two shows, we never really got a chance to, I guess, go forward with that whole invasion angle, and obviously we ended up doing it with XCW. But I think certainly Dan and Eli were pretty keen to be involved in it because it was a chance to wrestle someone new and do something cool. But
I always felt XCW swooped in and took their storyline from them because we did our storyline with them, and then like the SPWS thing was kind of put on hold for a little bit.
It was sort of in the background, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was in the background. Dan did chime out of the feud with me to do something with them in the middle of it.
That's right.
I always felt like, oh man, they must be so shitty that all of a sudden these old dudes fucking rock up and now they're taking the invasion storyline from them.
Because I think at one point we were talking about having XCW and SPWS kind of join forces against ICWS. So I guess it'd be like what WCW and ECW did with the invasion in WWF.
Like an alliance.
Yes, that sort of thing. But in the end I think it was more, ICWS versus XCW was the main thing, and then the SPWS stuff was sort of in the background, and then we came back to it once XCW had gone away again.
Yep. So where am I? Mike Delcano debuts against EQG.
Yep.
So I did interviews with Delcano, Zibby and Justin about their TWA, Trampoline Wrestling Australia.
Yep, I vaguely remember watching that and thinking it was pretty shit at the time.
Yeah, well, like they said, like, because they were so just, when you're in your own federation, your federation's best.
Oh, absolutely.
So they were like, ICWS, cool, there's some guys to join our fed.
Yeah, that's right. And we were the same with them.
And you guys were like, whoa, no. You guys got three guys, we got more than that at least. You're coming to us if anything's happening. And then nothing would happen.
Yep.
But then eventually Delcano did make the jump.
That's right, yep.
So your memories on him, was he like a Dante Daniels? He comes in and straight away you can see he's got talent.
I think so, maybe not quite to the same degree. I think it took him a bit longer to really settle in. But his first match was against El Queso Grande, and he did pretty well in that match. I guess really stood out for his first match.
Yeah.
And then I think Justin came in and he started feuding with Justin after that. So, that was a chance to wrestle someone that he was already familiar with. So that sort of got him into a really comfortable state.
Yeah.
And we tend to do that with a lot of new guys. Like we would put them against people that they were they were comfortable with to start with.
Well, I always call EQG the ICWS welcoming committee.
Yeah, that's right.
You get your first match against EQG, you get a nice little win, and then we move forward.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to start for a lot of guys.
Yeah.
And but then with other guys as well, like Justin's first match was against Mike, and Alex started out wrestling SPWS, so guys that they sort of already knew and would feel comfortable with. Yeah. And it wasn't until they'd been around for a while that you'd start putting them against guys that maybe when they first started they wouldn't have been comfortable wrestling.
Yeah, fair enough.
But then as they sort of get into the groove of it, they can start to branch out and have matches against a wider range of people.
Yep. Okay. So at this stage, when Delcano and SPWS come in, all your, I guess the mid card that you'd had for quite some time started to fall off the map. Big Mac, Blaze, Knuckles, he'd been coming back and forth, for short little stints, and then he would go again. Bundaberg, Johnny Rocket. But with the influx of the new talent, you guys probably weren't as worried?
No, I don't think so. I think there was a point where, probably after Bundaberg left, where we thought, this might not go on for much longer because we're struggling for numbers here, because it was also around that time that Eli and DJ was starting to...
Yeah, I was starting to do pro wrestling, which is also another issue that comes into play later.
That's
on
right,
as well.
yeah. But yeah, I think, guys like Mike and Justin came in, and obviously XCW as well would come in, and we would end up doing that really awesome XCW invasion.
Yeah.
Which I'm sure we'll get to.
Yes, we will. So Twisted Metal 4.
Yep.
I think this is a turning point for ICWS,
absolutely.
really.
Yeah, this was by far the best show we've done to that point.
Really, excellent. So before we even really talk about Twisted Metal 4, finding out about XCW and me.
Yep.
I know that I know this, but I can't remember right now. But how did you guys find out about us? I think it was either Dan or Eli found us on YouTube and messaged the YouTube channel.
I think it was Dan. That sounds like something Dan would do. It might have been Eli.
Because Mike was in control of the YouTube channel.
Right.
He would message me.
Right.
This guy, Dan Zeplin, has this Federation ICWS, sent me the link.
Yep.
And I think it was a few months that I'd known about it, but I never really thought about it.
Right.
More. And then eventually I added Dan and Eli on MSN.
Yep.
And talked to them. And
wow, MSN, that's a long time ago.
Yeah. And then one day it just clicked, and I was like, XCW's back in 2010. We're doing all these shows before we set off into the sunset.
Yep.
Why don't I do this as well?
Yeah.
Because I'm going to want to keep wrestling once XCW's gone. Maybe I can join these guys. I know they're a bit younger than me, but that won't matter eventually once they get a bit older.
Yeah.
But what were your thoughts on finding out about XCW?
Well, I think, as you said, it was mostly Dan and Eli who sort of made the initial contact, and I know for Twisted Metal 4, because as I said, I think Bundaberg was supposed to beat Dan for the title at Twisted Metal 4, and then obviously Bundaberg left, so Dan was sort of left with nothing to do. And then Dan came up to me and said, we've found this other federation, and there's this guy, Taser, who wants to wrestle me at Twisted Metal 4, and I was a bit hesitant because, Twisted Metal 4 is the biggest show of the year, and, we're bringing in this guy that we don't really know to wrestle the champion.
Yeah.
So, obviously, I was a little apprehensive at first, but then obviously you came in and did that promo to start with, which, by the way, it's quite funny to watch that promo back because you were really quiet at the time.
I know. I think I wasn't in the groove with my promo. I was like a bit, I don't know these guys, so I was just kind of like. Because usually I'm a loud, I'm Taser, but I was like, I'm Taser.
Yeah, like you spoke really softly and really politely.
Yeah, I
think
I wasn't used to the environment.
Yes, maybe. But yeah, you came in with just Mike and did that match against Dan where it started pouring with rain halfway through.
Yeah, it kind of ruined the match for us.
I actually thought it made it better because it made it seem really epic in a way.
Yeah, it made it very dramatic.
Yeah, it started pouring with rain, and then you just picked Dan up and powerbomb him, and 1, 2, 3, and holy shit, this guy has just joined the Fed, has beaten the champion at the biggest show of the year.
Clean, as well.
Yeah.
Whose idea was it to have me go over the champion?
I don't remember, to be perfectly honest. I think it was probably Dan's. Which, again, if that was me, I probably wouldn't have agreed to it.
Yeah.
But I think at that point there was just literally nothing else for Dan to do. So,
is it more of a committee at this stage? You guys are all...
I think so. I think for most for most of the ICWS history, it was mostly me, Dan, and DJ doing the booking. I know there were periods where maybe I was more involved and DJ sort of took a back step, but we tried to sort of keep it as a three-man committee where we would make the decisions. I know DJ's talked about a couple of occasions where Dan and I made some decisions and he didn't know about them, so that might have created a bit of tension. But yeah, for the most part, I think we tried to make decisions as best we could amongst the three of us. We didn't always agree, which that's the way things go.
Yeah.
But, when you look back at the shows and see how the storylines and the matches play out, I think we did a pretty good job.
Yeah, agreed. So your thoughts on my debut? Did you think?
Yeah, I thought it was
solid.
Yeah, I thought it was a good match. Then it was just cool to have someone, I guess, a bit older and a bit, and you were pretty different as well to everyone else at the time. Like you sort of came out in the, I think I called you a hippie when I did the commentary on DVD. So, just a different sort of character, I guess, and I think it really gave us the spark that we were looking for, because we had guys like Mike and SPWS, but they were still quite raw at that point. Whereas obviously you were the veteran. You've been doing backyard wrestling for a long time, so you sort of knew what you were doing, and I thought you adapted quite well to the whole environment, and
I think in a way I kind of helped guys see, because when I came to ICWS, it seemed like the crowd didn't really participate.
Yeah.
And I kind of really tried to usher in, you guys, this is an event, If you're in the crowd, be a crowd.
Yeah,
it gets the guys who are wrestling into it, and I think that will really help the product that you see on the base. But also, I think at the time, someone might have mentioned to me, if we stuff something up, we'll redo it.
Yeah.
And I was always like, no, you've got to do it in one take. You can't redo things because, that takes the realism out of it. It's got to be all in one take.
Yeah, and that was a source of frustration for me because in the early period of ICWS, like I think DJ mentioned this in his podcast, but we would film matches mainly for the recap. Yeah. So it wasn't so much about having a coherent match. It was more about just having awesome moves that would look good when you sort of cut them together. And that always annoyed me because I was in charge of doing DVDs. Okay. So then I'd have to take these sort of disjointed matches and try and make them look good on the DVD. Yeah. But I think that's a fair point. When you came in, we started that shift towards, doing matches as full matches with psychology and free flowing.
I just felt really strongly about it, and I thought it would help you guys improve more as wrestlers. And I think everyone started to really up their game a bit more because they saw, that's actually a way you can do it. Yep. Maybe we'll try that. And then when they did try it, they actually did well with it.
That's right. So. Yeah. And I think because that show Twisted Metal 4 was probably the start of the golden era for the ICWS.
Yep. So at the same show, JD Flame debuts. Yep. And I thought watching it on the DVD was quite impressive with Delcano.
Yep.
What were your thoughts on JD Flame's debut and meeting him for the first time?
So obviously he was a friend of Mike's and Clint's. Obviously Clint came in a bit later. But yeah, it was cool to have another guy on the roster. I think Justin was just such a natural heel. Like he was the guy who everyone just loved to hate. Yeah. And I guess because he was a bit like that in real life, I hope he doesn't mind me saying this, but he was a bit of a dickhead at the time.
Yeah, no, he was a dickhead. Yeah.
He was.
It's on record.
Yeah, he was. He was really loud and obnoxious, and would just get under everyone's skin.
I told him that to his face when we did the podcast. No one really liked you, man. Yeah. But the 180 he's done now is incredible.
Oh, absolutely. The last time I saw him, he just changed completely, and he's turned this really awesome guy, which is great. Yeah, considering the way he was when he first started. But yeah, I think in a way that personality, I guess, was actually good because that came through in his character. Yep. And as a result, he was probably the best heel we had at that time, just because he was so loud and out there that it was really easy for people to not like him, which is exactly what you want in a heel.
Yep, exactly. And I thought he was a great heel.
Yeah, absolutely.
Definitely would have fit into XCW quite well, I think, because he was just so character driven as well.
Yeah, definitely.
All right, so the main event is Declan Diamond, formerly known as Nitro.
Yep.
We all know him as DJ. Takes on MC Cruel in, which is supposed to be their last matches.
Well, at the time it was, as far as we knew. So
you had me come in, you had JD Flame come in, but you had Mike Delcano, Dan Zeplin, Nick James. Other than that, SBWS as well. Okay, that's a solid roster. We can work with this. But they depart. So your thoughts on that last match? Were you sad in a way, thinking that they're gone? This is like going to be a completely different federation now because it's just like Dan and Nick who are the original.
I think on the one hand I was a bit disappointed that they were leaving because I felt that I thought they were going towards pro wrestling a bit too soon because at that point they were still only like 16, 17 years old, and I was thinking, you've got a lot of time up your sleeve.
I know, that's what I always say to guys, don't do it yet, just wait until you're 18, 19, 20 to do it.
But on the other hand, you don't want to sort of stand in the way and be like, no, you shouldn't do this, because if that's what they want to do, and obviously in Eli's case it's worked out really well for him, so I think I was, on one hand I was happy for them to go because they were following their dream, but on the other hand it left the ICWS in an interesting situation where we were missing two of the guys who'd sort of been around since the very beginning.
Yeah. Well, we do know that this doesn't last too long.
That's right. Yep.
Thankfully, but MC Cruel does come back for a little bit, but then goes away again. But we'll get to that when we get to it.
Yep.
But that was a great match between those two.
Oh, absolutely. They were both really happy with that match because I know they worked really hard because they knew it was the main event. It was at that time their last match. They wanted to make it really awesome, and they did a really good job. The only thing I'd say about that match is I really don't like the finish where I think Eli
goes... He's so exhausted.
Yeah, Eli goes for the super kick and then DJ sort of collapses on top of him. I never really liked that finish, but I thought I guess it made sense in the context of the whole match and being this epic final battle.
I guess they wanted maybe something different, like a
I think so. But I think it worked reasonably well. And really it capped off a really good show. Probably the best we'd done in the ICWS to that point.
Okay. So I want to get back onto you, some things that you were up to at this time. Making DVDs. Was it hard? The differing camera angles, post-production commentary. I was always extremely impressed with how you did your DVDs. And I remember getting that Twisted Metal 4 DVD and being like, this is pretty fucking good.
That's one of my favourites actually, the TM4 one. But it was a lot of hard work for the DVDs because
you'd have that show, you'd have the DVDs done by the next show.
I tried to do that at first. I think I fell behind a bit after a while because it's just so much work, and with school and study and all that sort of stuff, it's hard to find the time for it. But so I would make DVDs of the shows and basically cut all the matches together, put promos in between, put replays, commentary. So it was usually me and DJ doing commentary. I think Eli and I think yourself did one show as well.
I think I did
one or two.
Yeah, I think I did the XCW, ICWS series.
Yeah.
Then we were there, so I decided to chime in for the season's meeting.
That's right. Yeah. So that was, I guess, a lot of fun at the time, but eventually it just became too much work to really keep it going, which is a shame because a lot of the shows that came after I stopped doing DVDs were the best shows that we ever did.
They were amazing shows, man.
To see them on DVD would be awesome. Yeah. But, maybe I've still got all the footage, so maybe one day.
Do you still have all the separate matches, the original?
I think I should do. Yeah, I'm pretty sure I've got all of them.
Because I want to get every match I've ever had on. On my YouTube. So at some stage I need to pop by and.
Yeah, I think you asked me that a while ago, and I still haven't got around to doing it. So.
Yeah, there was just like those early matches that I had, which were only on the DVD, and they're never on. I never got the actual file.
Right. Okay.
Eventually, this is a part of the podcast, but I should be talking about this after the podcast. But
no, that's cool.
Yeah, I really like to get some of the matches that I still don't have and still haven't seen back. Since then.
Yeah, that's fair enough.
All right, so the next show is Animosity. I think after we talk about this, we'll take a little break. But Animosity,
maybe go to the XCW invasion.
Sorry?
Maybe go to the end of the XCW.
I got a wee really badly,
okay.
So we'll just do this show. I know it's a bit disjointed, but...
That's cool. Don't want you to piss yourself, mate.
No. But we bring back the hardcore title at Animosity. Yes. I know the champion was Big Mac.
Yep.
But now he's obviously left.
Yep.
So you bring back the hardcore title because of SBWS and their hard work?
Partly that, and partly because we had enough guys to justify having a second title again.
Yep.
So obviously around that time where we didn't have that many people, it was hard to keep 2 titles going. But now with all the new guys in, we felt that we had enough people to make it worthwhile. So we did a tournament at Animosity to crown a new champion, which from memory it was a pretty good tournament. Mike. It was 6 people, and so we did 3 singles matches and then a triple threat match as the final, which was Mike, Justin, and Chaos.
Yep.
And Mike won to become the new hardcore champion. So, which I think he deserved. He'd only been around for a few months at that point, but he was, out of all the new guys that were coming in, he was, I felt, the best and
stepping up to the plate.
Yeah, most deserving. So I think we were pretty keen to give him a run with the secondary title and see how he went. And he did a good job with it. Yeah,
I think he was a good hardcore champion.
Yeah, absolutely.
So also this show is infamous for me winning the ICWS championship.
That's right. Quite a big moment in
when I was told
history.
This, I was just so happy. Like, I can't believe these guys want to make me that champion. Yep. That's amazing.
Yep.
So I was really proud of it. What made you guys decide that?
I can't really remember, to be honest. I think at that point we'd already talked about doing the whole XCW invasion thing.
Yeah.
And we thought of having you as the champion would be the first step in that, I guess.
Yeah. Okay.
So, you would win the title and then bring in the XCW guys, and that's when it would all really kick off.
Yeah.
I guess at the time it was a pretty big step, to have someone sort of fairly new, someone we didn't really know that well, to beat, someone like Dan, who obviously had been around since almost the very beginning. So, to have someone like Taser as champion was a pretty big deal at the time. Yeah,
way to shake things up.
Definitely, yeah.
And I wanted to really keep this a secret. I wanted everyone to think this was my last show.
Oh, okay.
And I remember talking to you and Dan about it and saying I don't want anyone else to know, so he didn't even tell DJ. He was really, really angry about that.
Yeah, we did that a couple of times, I think, which I now regret. But
I mean, I didn't realise it upset him that much. I just wanted him to be surprised.
Yeah.
That's what I was getting more into. Everything that happens has to be a secret amongst the people who are doing it. So when you're in a crowd,
because that was sort of a different direction to what we were doing before, where we would sort of openly discuss everything that happened, so everyone knew what everyone else was doing.
Yeah.
And then when you came in, we started going down the path of wanting to surprise people and do things that people wouldn't expect, which in some cases worked well, but then in other cases maybe not so well.
Yeah. So people getting upset and all that.
Yeah.
But that was a really good match. I really enjoyed that match with Dan.
Yeah, I think it was a lot better than your Twisted Metal match.
Yes, I think it was a step up.
Yep.
And I was very proud to win the championship. And also one more thing I wanted to mention was that it was actually the first GBYWN Australian champion.
Yep, that's right.
As we were ushered in basically as the new representatives of the GBYWN in Australia.
Yep.
Did you ever care too much about the GBYWN stuff, or was that more Dan and...
That was more Dan, I think. No disrespect to GBYWN, obviously, but to be honest, I didn't see it as particularly important. I mean, obviously it was a way to get more exposure for the ICWS as, being the Australian representatives, but from my point of view, I was mostly focused on just booking our own thing and figuring out what to do with the ICWS title and all this stuff. And I guess the fact that it was also the GBYWN Australian title was pretty cool, but I never really gave too much thought to it, to be perfectly honest.
Fair enough. Alright, Chris, well, we're at an hour 23. That's part one. That's part one.
Wow, time flies when you're having fun.
Yeah, but we're in the middle of 2010, and we'll obviously be going forward to 2012, early 2013.
Yep.
So thank you very much for part one, Chris.
Thank you.
And thank you for listening to the GBYWN Australia podcast. We'll be with you for part two with Chris Zeplin very soon. Thank you for listening.
Thanks, guys.